Hello, family members. Hope you're having a nice day today. I want to talk to you today about something that I keep seeing come up, and since it's sort of the time of year where this comes up a lot, I think this is a good time to talk about George Floyd. I mean, why not, right? So, why do I want to talk about George Floyd now? Well, it wasn't that long ago that there was that really bad comedy roast of like, I think it was Kevin Hart. And it was just like a bunch of racist junk, which is really weird because, you would have thought that people like Kevin Hart being involved, that maybe there would have been some motivation to keep it from being racist, but no. Roast a black guy with racist jokes, why not? Sure. Um, and not, like black comedians making them, like white comedians making racist jokes. And one of them was a joke about how George Floyd was looking up at us, implying that George Floyd is in hell. Boy, that's a awful take. Awful take, right? Like, here's the thing that seems to be the case is that when you say things like, boy, that's an awful take, you're going to get someone from the right who hops in to say, why do you lefties have to, or libs have to make George Floyd out to be a saint? Here's the thing. Nobody's doing that. Like, nobody's doing that. Like, George Floyd was a human being. We are not trying to dehumanize him into making him into some angel. And we're not trying to dehumanize him and make him into some devil. He was a human being who was murdered by the state, period. They didn't have any good reason to murder him. The only potential crime that they were there for was like passing a bad check. That's not a crime that even if you're convicted of, you're going to be executed by the state. Probably a fine, maybe probation. I mean, it's not a huge crime. And even assuming that he was guilty, which we don't know, it was never adjudicated. So assuming he was guilty of that, he did not deserve to die. That there was no threat to another person, there was no reason for him to be slowly suffocated to death by a police officer with his knee on his neck. Even if he was as guilty as he could have been on of the crime he was committed of that, or accused of that day. And it's really funny when you'll see people on the right then try to pull out some sort of like story about him from the past, whether or not it's even true, as if it's like some sort of complicating factor. I'm like, even if that was true, Derek Chauvin, his murderer, did not know that. That had no bearing on whether or not he was murdered by Derek Chauvin. He could have never done anything wrong in his life up until that very day, and it wouldn't have made any difference to Derek Chauvin. You see? You see the difference there? If we're talking about somebody who like knew him and knew his history or whatever, and that had some sort of bearing on their actions, that'd be one thing, but that's not what happened. A stranger who was working for the state murdered him with no more context than he might have been involved in like a petty theft. Really? Really? And so it's so interesting when people are like, why do you have to make him into a saint? I'm like, nobody is making him into a saint. We're just saying that he was murdered whether or not he was a saint. He was murdered whether or not he was a danger to his community. Who he was had no bearing on whether or not he was murdered. He was murdered by the state, and it's quite likely, we can't know exactly what was in Derek Chauvin's heart, but it's quite likely that it was done because he was black. And he could have been the most virtuous black man or the least virtuous black man in the city, and it wouldn't have mattered. I just find this very strange, because it's like, when there is some sort of police action and the police are clearly in the wrong, there's always going to be people who come out of the woodwork to try to come up with some complicating factor that makes what the police did acceptable somehow. Because they want to give the police the benefit of the doubt. They want to believe that the police are a necessary force and a force for good in society. And I'm sorry, that's just not true. You know, we let me give you an example. This involves no black people at all. This is all white people. In fact, this is white women involved. A white woman went to work. Apparently her job closed early, and so she went to the bar and she started drinking. And she was at the bar for like an hour or two or whatever, and left and was driving drunk down a pretty, well-traveled highway in Daytona Beach shores. And all sorts of people were calling 911 and being like, hey, there's this lady, she's driving drunk on the road, she keeps almost hitting cars, she's in a mailbox, she hit a trash can. There were multiple calls. I've heard them on my local news. This just happened on Monday, on June 1st. And the cops were not able to stop her in time before she murdered someone. She, here in Daytona, we, in Volusia County where I live, we have drive-on access to the beach, which I really love, especially as a disabled person. It's great. You don't have to like carry all of your stuff. You just literally park right there, and then you can put your stuff out, and then you're right there on the beach. It's wonderful, and it's not that common because there is some safety concerns, and it's just a lot easier for municipalities to not allow it. And so I really love living in a place where it's an option. And when you drive onto the beach, you have to stop at a little toll booth. And if you're disabled, you just show them your disabled pass and you go right in for free, which is great. And if you're not, then you pay, or if you have like, if you're a resident, you can get like an annual pass or whatever. And every single time I've ever stopped at one of those toll booths, those people have been so wonderful, so professional. They are very helpful, wonderful members of our community. And that drunk lady just drove right into the toll booth and killed this lady, a nice, I think 60-something-year-old lady who'd been working there a long time. Like 35 seconds after she entered her booth to start her shift, she was hit by this other woman who was drunk, who the police had been warned about, who had had a chance to stop her, and they couldn't stop her in time. And this nice lady, I believe her name was Tammy Jo Baker, murdered, just doing her job, serving her community. And obviously, you can tell that it very much upsets me. The whole situation was very upsetting. But not only were the police unable to stop Tammy Jo from being murdered by that drunk driver, the drunk driver then got Baker acted because she was, making statements indicating she might be at risk of self-injury. And when she was released from the hospital, the cops just lost track of her. Fortunately, they did, I think within 12 hours of losing her, find her back. But, it's stunning. Not only were they unable to stop her from killing someone, even though they had multiple 911 calls, even though there's police presence in that area fairly frequently, I think there's a Daytona Beach Shores, police force. I think there's an actual, police station on the exact road where she was driving drunk, not far from where she was driving drunk. Now, it may not be all the same system. I will admit it could be, the 911 calls weren't going to that particular branch of law enforcement. But she was in the vicinity of law enforcement. They were given multiple warnings. They weren't able to stop her. And then they lost track of her. All within, a 48-hour period. And this is not uncommon. Let's be honest with ourselves as Americans. This is not uncommon. For the police to be this inept or unable to stop crimes. I mean, when I was a kid, we used to come to Florida every year from West Virginia. Every other Christmas we were down here. The Christmases we were here, we came at Thanksgiving or whatever. We were down here a lot because that's where my grandparents lived and lots of my other family lived and where my parents grew up and all that. And there were people in our neighborhood that recognized that pattern and knew my dad was a hunter, and they came in one Christmas while we were gone and just robbed us blind. Stole TVs, my brother's CDs, guns, whatever, some of which were heirloom guns that my dad had gotten from his father, irreplaceable things, And the cops came out and they documented the crime or whatever, and then nothing. They never did anything more than that. They never did anything other than just come out and documented that the theft had happened so that we could file our insurance claims. They didn't do anything to actually catch anyone. And wouldn't you know it, around the same time, the next time we were out of town at Christmas, we got robbed again. And we had a pretty good idea of who did it. Let's be honest, when you live in the middle of nowhere, when you live in rural areas, small towns like that, you tend to know who's doing things. We could have probably made a pretty educated guess, at the very least. But the cops never did anything, either time, other than just come out and document that the crime had happened. Why do we need a police force for that? We could have a documentary force that comes. It was so pointless. When I was working at a group home in rural West Virginia, one of my coworkers, let's say, died. A lot of us had suspicions that he was murdered for a number of reasons. a lot of us had a very good idea of who that murderer would have been, if indeed he was murdered. But as far as I know, there was never any sort of police investigation into that. They just assumed that someone who knew how to use firearms somehow would have decided to commit suicide by shooting themselves in the chest with a shotgun. Very unlikely. When I was around the same time, a few years after that, they found a body just over the property line, not quite on my parents' farm, but very, very close to my parents' farm. And it took them a while. They did actually figure out who murdered that guy and do something about it. I guess you can't really say somebody committed suicide when their body has clearly been dumped in an illegal dump site. You know, it just doesn't. But just prior to that, there was a very suspicious missing persons case that very much could have been linked to the whole sordid affair with the dead body found by my parents' property. It was a very poorly done hit job. And the other missing persons who's never gotten justice also had a reason to have come afoul of the person who supposedly paid for this hit. Do you think that the local police ever did anything with that? Do you think there's ever going to be justice for that guy? Probably not, you know? Every once in a while, you will see the police do something effective. But it's not consistent. You know, when somebody steals from you, when someone commits a crime against you, it's just not that likely that the police are going to do much for you, other than maybe document it so that you can file for your insurance. And I don't think we need a police force for that. We can have some sort of civil squad that could go around and document things for insurance claim purposes if that needs to be done. You know, like they don't need to be armed to do that. It's very interesting to me. You know, there's people who are very like, well, we have to have police. You know, what would you do if there was a crime and there was no police to call? And I'm like, well, most of the time you're going to have to deal with it yourself anyway. You know, I'm a single person living alone, a single woman living alone. Do I think that if someone broke into my house, police is going to protect me from that? No. My dog might, you know. I might be able to scare him away with the broken gun that's in my closet that my dad left here because he wanted to get it repaired and then he never got around to doing it while he was visiting, you know. But I very much feel like in the moment I would be on my own, you know. I just, over and over again, we hear these cases of people calling the police in moments of vulnerable situations, like, you know, an autistic person having a meltdown, or, you know, hearing some intruder in or a suspected intruder, and you call for help, and then they show up and they like shoot the person who they were supposed to be helping, or arrest them, or whatever, you know, like, it's just, no matter what your skin color is, but it's worse if you're not white, let's be honest. No matter what your skin color is, but especially if you're not white, It is a literal crapshoot when you call the police if they're going to be helpful to you or not. You know, if you're talking about, oh, I had a car wreck and I need them to come out and like document what happened for insurance purposes, then yeah, you're probably going to get a satisfactory response from the police. But if it's like something that's an urgent crime, or you're the victim of a crime and you need help solving it or preventing it from happening again, they're not going to help you most of the time. I was reading this thread, creator on Facebook, and I'm sure other social medias. Chamika House Osuya, I think is her name. I don't never heard it pronounced. I've only read it, so I apologize. But she had posted. She gets things from white people who want to post anonymously to her community and get feedback about some sort of issue they're having related to race relations. And a person had posted about their child going to the park with their babysitter, and then there were some black guys in the neighborhood, and the babysitter thought maybe they were up to no good, and then the kid got all nervous and cried, running the way home, and then the parents called the police and and they couldn't believe why people were mad at them for calling the police. You know, if you see something, say something. Isn't that how it's supposed to be? First of all, if you see something, say something is for terrorists. If you thought that they were about to blow up your neighborhood park or something, if they were doing anything that made you think that, that would be a see something, say something. It's not, there's somebody in my neighborhood I don't recognize, I better call the police, right? And the very fact that it was, again, black people, how do you live in this country and have missed the message that the police disproportionately kill black people during their interactions, and that things like that, like scenarios like what this woman described, where they were made uncomfortable by the presence of black people in their neighborhood, and they called the police, and how many times has that led to somebody getting shot? Usually the black person who wasn't doing anything, you know? Like, there's real documented cases of harm like that. It's not a high chance, I'm sure, in any one given interaction. But I can't imagine not taking that into consideration. Thinking, is this a scenario that really, really requires the police? Because if I get them involved, they're bringing guns. And they could escalate situation really out of control. And there's documented cases of them doing that in this country for decades. If you're a white person and the idea of calling the police on black people for anything less than a ongoing violent crime doesn't give you pause, even if it's something where you eventually go, I still have to call the police about this. If you don't at least consider that, if that's not part of the calculation for you, then you are dangerously out of touch with the country that you live in. The point of all this is that George Floyd didn't have to be a saint to deserve to not be murdered by the state. That's the point. And the fact that he was murdered by the state and you would like to defend the state is a really gross reason to condemn him to hell. I am sorry that by his death, He has reminded you that you live in a racist country and that makes you uncomfortable. But that does not give you a right to drag him after dying, to act like he was some horrible person, or like it mattered one way or the other if he was a horrible person or not. He was murdered by the state either way. It didn't have anything to do with his, actions as with anything related to his humanity as a living, breathing human person who existed. He was just a black body, and they didn't care what happened to him. Derek Chauvin didn't care if he lived or died. And that is worse. It's so much worse. He was a non-entity to Derek Chauvin. And that is the same thing that you do to him when you try to condemn him to hell, just for being a victim of the state. Right, Socks? Socks didn't like it. Right now in Kenya, there are riots going on because the United States is trying to build an Ebola response camp on a military base in Kenya. The current Ebola outbreak is in the DRC and somewhat in Uganda, and not in Kenya. There's been no cases in Kenya. And the people of Kenya are very much like, why are you trying to bring Ebola into our country where it doesn't exist? And I can't blame them for that. And I think that a lot of people think, oh, well, Kenya, Uganda, whatever, it's all Africa, whatever. And it's not. The government in Kenya is like, well, we don't want to ruin our relationship with Donald Trump and with the United States, so we'll work with them on this. We'll trust them on this. And they shouldn't. The American state is being run by people who are very easily dehumanizing other human beings. When Elon's Doge gutted USAID, he created the conditions that has led this Ebola outbreak to get as bad as it is before it was detected. Trusting the United States right now is a dicey thing to do. And the United States, part of the system that put us where we are today, is this us versus them-ism in law enforcement. And it created an incentive structure for them to scratch the back of crooked politicians who were willing to overlook their failures to their communities. All of this is connected in ways that are hard to fully define. And I don't have enough time to do that right now, but I wanted to at least bring up that people are dying in Kenya because of these protests. There's been at least two people dying in the course of these protests under suspicious circumstances. And that is the United States right there. In theory, we're there to help, right? But are we really helping? In theory, police are here to help, but they're not consistent enough at their jobs. And when they do things wrong, there's not enough accountability for them. Now, I'm probably out of time. I don't know if this is still recording or not because my camera's kind of weird. But if so, I will say thank you very much for watching. Love you, family members. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all of the things. Definitely comment and let me know how much you are aware of what's going on in Kenya with the Ebola protests. I'm interested to know how much that's breaking through to other people. So, love you. Talk to you later. Take care of yourselves. Bye.